people will start, wandering in. I mean, I thought when we said we're going to do one at 5:10 to 6, I went, what is this? And I didn't set this up. This was the first day of the conference. But let me just say this to you. We are taping this and audio, and we also have slides, and we decided we're going to do some webinars. We've got such great sessions, and people want extra questions answered, so we'll try and do one a month, right? We'll do that and get it done. This is education and its impact at the community level. It's important that, I always say people wonder why we're doing this. I noticed that somebody just joined it here who's on the program who we didn't have on the program. Is that right?
Some guy stuck in
Gee,
through the back door.
okay. All right. Anyway, we have John Windhausen who's going to be on. John has a long historic history in this whole area. He doesn't look as old as the time he's been in. So he looks good. The School Health and Libraries Broadband Coalition, which has a meeting in Washington, what's the time?
May 20th to the
May
22nd.
20th to the 22nd. This is their annual meeting in DC. And you should try and get there, and you can see him afterwards about that. And then Myra Best, who is the director of the Digital Learning Institute, but was the person who was working with our former governor until we got everything connected in North Carolina in terms of all the schools across North Carolina. And then Frank Odasz, as I've said to everyone, only Frank would have this information sitting here like this because he used it in Alaska. He's really can tell you about Alaska, all about it. He's been there over and over and over working and in the northern states of the United States and as a consultant in the whole field of education. And if you know Frank and you are on his email, you almost don't need a subscription to other magazines or anything because he has this great portal, that he just fills you full of information. So you have a wonderful opportunity. I just hope we have more people coming in because they have a powerful message. They're all great. So, Frank.
I'd like to make a few comments before our esteemed presenters take the podium, and I would prefer it if you would speak from the podium so we could get you on video as well. In every session here, I have heard citizens need to better understand the benefits of broadband. And I've been hearing that for 20, 30 years. I've been involved with online education, K-12 education, higher education, and those don't really reach regular citizens. What we need is a new form of informal community education that's ongoing. And I'll speak more about that later, but I wanted to explain the context of this. So, broadband adoption means there's opportunity at their fingertips, but if there's nobody to share what's already working for others like them and how to realize the high-end opportunities for their very specific needs across broadband sectors, across various demographics and age groups, then in my opinion, from direct experience with rural people who don't get it, we've missed the boat. Adoption is Netflix in Alaskan villages, not the economic development, not the reculturization that's possible with a world of opportunities. So I will speak as little as possible. My presentation is actually on the web, and if we decide just to get into a discussion and we don't get to me, that's all right. I am a resource available to everyone. Our presenters are Myra Best, who is in North Carolina, where they have the largest rural unemployed population of any state in the Union, 280,000. They also have thousands of miles of 100 gig fiber and some of the best convening and cooperation across sectors of any state. The new Digital Learning Institute is what Myra Best will speak on. And then John Windhausen will take the podium. John has been a driving force for E-rate, for Broadband for All, to assure quality of life. And he's a legend in his own time. And I encourage you to check out SHLB and join. And then we're going to have a graybeard of Texas Community Networking step up and give us his unabashed perspectives on what the three of us will have presented. So with that, Myra, and Dave will get your PowerPoint up.
Thank you.
And this is informal, and we will have time for questions. And I'm really pleased that you're here. You must be the ones that are passionate about education. Yes.
as I said to my colleagues, I will either be very brief or very entertaining. So I'm going for brief, and hopefully the others can be entertaining. But I am Myra Best, and I am going to talk to you about the Digital Learning Institute. But I also am going to try to answer 4 primary questions, because a lot of the work that we are beginning to do with the Digital Learning Institute comes from the work we did in North Carolina. So I'm going to try and tell you the North Carolina story about technology and infrastructure and how we got to where we are. I'm going to talk about who DigiLearn is, why technology is the difference maker for the education and the economy, and then how do you build support for technology in states. And I'm going to begin by where we are presently in North Carolina. This shows the fiber that we have through the nonprofit MCNC, so you can see the blue is what we already have in place, and the yellow represents the fiber that's available for MCNC to expand in partnership with the providers. I start at this point because it was a 10-year journey for me to get us to this point, and I think that's very important for people to understand. This is about a journey, and it's about getting the right people in place to help you accomplish what you're trying to accomplish. I also will tell you that North Carolina was very fortunate in that we had assets already in place when we started our real focus on the use of technology. But to begin my story, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what motivated us to get involved in the infrastructure and focusing on the K-12. Governor Bev Perdue, who was then the lieutenant governor when we started this in 2006, has always been a very strong proponent of education and leveling the playing field and ensuring that everyone has access and all students have access to equal education opportunities. As you heard Frank say, we have the largest unemployed in the rural areas of our state. We are very rural. We're very divided in haves and have-nots. We have the mountains, we have the coast. We're very challenged geographically as well as economically. But we've always had a strong support for education in our state. And at the time we started this effort, which will not be unusual for a lot of people, we had, in our rural parts of the state, we had students who did not have access to qualified teachers. They had teachers that were teaching out of field. They didn't have access to services. So we decided that the best thing to do would be to create a virtual school, which was the first statewide virtual school provided by the state in the country. And we decided we would do that because it would be a good way to level the playing field and ensure that everybody, all the students had access to courses. Well, we did that. We rolled it out. It was a big success. And when we started looking at the students who were taking the courses online, we found that they were all the students in the metropolitan areas. They were not the students in the rural areas. So as we did the survey, we began to find out why. And what we learned is they did not have connectivity. And we learned that some of the students that we had companies give laptops, so some of these students would have opportunities to take the courses online, and we found out they were throwing them away because they thought they were cheap laptops, they didn't work, and they didn't have the connectivity. So we had to kind of step back and rethink, we're approaching this all wrong. So we then decided that the best thing to do would be to focus on the infrastructure, because we could not provide equal access without having the connectivity and the bandwidth across the state. So we called on very talented and bright people to help us in this process. But the next part I'd like for you to look at is where we ended up on the journey of putting the fiber in place. We ended up with MCNC, and we had not only education, we ended up with the charter schools, healthcare, as you heard, as well as other groups in communities who were stressed and not able to have access. But the important thing I want to point out is not what we did so much as how we did it. And in getting to this point, we had to have the right people in place. We had to have the right people at the table, and the very first people we invited to have that conversation were the providers, because the providers were not connecting across the state. Well, we ended up beating the battle of getting the infrastructure in place, and I would like for you to look at this slide to see how the access and the use has increased from 2009, when we put the network in place, to January 2015. And I show this because it also tells the story that Frank mentioned to begin with, is how do we get people to take advantage and use it once you have it. So you can see that it took a period of time to get people engaged, and it was through the education process that we were able to get people engaged in this process. And as you can see, the rate and the access and the use is very high in our state today. And basically our K-12 schools have unlimited access to any kind of bandwidth that they need. And this is just a chart to show you what some of that bandwidth looks like. So I'm going to begin by telling you the lessons we learned and how that has carried on to the next level that we're going to face. The primary lesson that we learned, and I want y'all to know this microphone is right in my eyes. I feel like I'm going to, looking at a microscope. But the primary lesson that we learned is what gets funded is what gets done. If there is not a funding stream, it will not get done. And in our case, we were involved with policymakers. We were also very fortunate that we had leadership at the executive level. We knew we had to have the General Assembly involved because they are your bankers. And we knew that the one thing that everybody agreed on, no matter if they were Republican or Democrat, whatever their affiliation was, they did agree on education, that education was very important to our state. So the second lesson that we learned is that you had to have a shared vision for the state. Having everybody run around and say we need connectivity, we need bandwidth, we need this, without connecting it to a broader vision will not work. And you can't get the buy-in from the people that you need. The state of North Carolina has a vision for technology. It has a vision for technology and education that has maintained its position across 3 different administrations. We have gone from full Democrat control to full Republican control, and they are as committed to the technology and education as we were when we were in office. We have built on that asset. So having that shared vision also requires having the right people at the table. You have to have your legislators, you have to have your governor, you have to have your executive branch, you have to have the providers. If you don't have the providers at the table, they will shut it down. And that was the first conversation we had, and we had to create a win-win. They are a business, and people need to understand that when you're in a business, you want to make money. And you have to find out how can we accomplish our goal for providing this for all of our schools so that everybody wins. The agreement that we made was if you will support us in getting the middle mile with a nonprofit, and the nonprofit is key to what we did in North Carolina. Having the nonprofit build the middle mile and giving the last mile to the providers has really increased their revenue, because once we got the districts connected, their role was to connect the schools, and that really increased their capacity and helped. When you looked at the map that I showed you initially with the yellow fiber, the yellow that's available for public-private partnerships, the goal behind that is to help create that last mile to the home, so that the providers can get that, because we do have a nonprofit. They can get that at a below market rate, which helps them create the incentive to put the fiber out further to the homes and do that last mile connection, which is what our goal is in our state. And we were able to do that, or MCNC was able to do that through DTOP funds. So I think that's an important piece of this. The formal stakeholder group with the skilled leadership team. We put together a team that has the process or the responsibility to monitor the process all the way through. And the stakeholder group included representatives who made the decision about money in the General Assembly and technology. It included representation from the executive branch. We got the best and the brightest. Jane Patterson was on that, was also one of our members who had the history of what all the work had been done in North Carolina at that time. We had engineers, we had businesses, we had the poorest of the poor involved, the wealthiest of the wealthiest involved in terms of our counties in our state. We had school districts that had no technology. We had school districts that had the most technology. And together we collectively came up with a direction that we wanted to go. The skilled leadership team is very important. You have to have someone who understands the policy, because as you go through this process, somebody has to be informing the leadership about what kind of policies you have to change in order to get this scaled across the state. You have to have engineering support. You have to have somebody who understands engineering, and in the case I don't know that I was the skilled policy person, but I was the one they chose. I was the one that had that responsibility, and then Phil Emer from the Friday Institute was the engineer that led that piece of it. So you have to have those two pieces at minimum to get the plan done. Plus, we had great resources from MCNC, Cisco, and others to help us develop this process. And it had to be based on the assets that were already in place. The first level we did was an assessment of what our assets were. MCNC was an asset. We had the information highway. A lot of the work Jane had done through the Hunt administration was in place. And the reason we had to do that is we had to prove to the General Assembly that we could pull this together working from the strength that we had. And we spent a lot of time proving a lot of things. And the reason for that, quite honestly, is because the General Assembly had so many bad experiences because technology is rapidly changing. And they would have companies come and agree to do services. In the next session of the General Assembly, they'd ask for millions more dollars and millions of dollars. It was like $90 and $100 million they were having to find. They couldn't manage the cost. And we assured them that we could help them manage the cost if we used the nonprofit, which is how we've been able to manage that effort. But we had a clear plan. We had a feasibility study to look at the assets, and then we had a team that scaled the plan, and it was feet on the street. It was every school was visited. They did assessments in every school. We had companies like Cisco give us engineers who volunteered their time to go in and work with the teams to do this across our state. And I can't emphasize the importance of the collaboration. The collaboration is what ended up leading us to expanding the work we did so that healthcare could be included, so that other organizations that were in communities that didn't have connectivity could participate. And that is a managed market approach, and I know there are those who are very committed to an open market approach, but the state of North Carolina had to, in its role, rethink what its priorities were as a state. We had to have state sustainable funding in order to take advantage of E-rate. E-rate was very critical. I think John's going to talk a little bit about that later. But we had to show how we were going to take our assets, how we were going to manage the money, where we were going to get the money, and what other resources we were going to use. So through E-rate and having a state sustainable funding structure, we were able to provide equal access and equal opportunity to every one of our K-12 schools in the state. And because of that investment, we were able to allow other groups to benefit from that primary investment. It enabled them to take advantage of what needed to be done. The fifth lesson learned was you had to manage the process and adjust accordingly. The technology is not an event, it's a process. And that is, as we learned, as we found the barriers along the way, we had to stop, adjust, and make what corrections we need to make along the way. And then the key part was defining the roles for the states and the locals. It's like the state had to have a clear direction for what it could manage, and then you had to give the freedom and the flexibility to the locals to do what they needed to do. And in our case for education, it was having that digital resources. And you can see I gave you an example. In our state, in North Carolina, it was provide the infrastructure, create an environment where you can do digital learning, develop leadership capacity, and ensure high-quality digital resources, and leverage the support at the local level. And at the end of the day, what we ended up having were legislators who were as informed as the team doing the work about what this meant for the state. That is why they have sustained and supported it. So that brings me to DigiLearn. When we left office, Governor Perdue again was very committed to ensuring that we helped others across the country do the work we've done in North Carolina. So in our case, DigiLearn is a nonprofit that seeks to narrow the nation's persistent achievement and skills gap by accelerating the use of technology in education, because that is the key to economic prosperity. Our first line of work is focusing on technology and broadband connectivity for teachers in K-12. Our goal is to deal with birth through 5 as well as post-secondary, the whole womb to tomb kind of mentality, so that we can allow workers who will be changing jobs over the course of their time to have access to opportunities to learn new skills and new jobs that have not yet been created, because we know with rapidly advancing technologies, all the jobs that we have will be rapidly changing, so people that are currently working have to have access and can do the work that needs to be done. What makes DigiLearn different is we're going to really incent the entrepreneur aspect, and particularly in the K-12. And that is to bring entrepreneurs and business people directly into the classrooms to work with the teachers on how to take advantage now that you have this connectivity and this bandwidth and you can utilize technology. How can we create tools and development products that will in fact be able to be scaled across the state, not only in North Carolina, but across the country. I wanted to show you briefly our board of directors, and I wanted to show you the board of directors because we put together this board the same way we put together the team that led the statewide work. We have representation from policy. We have 2 former governors who serve as chair and vice chair. One was a former Democratic governor, Governor Perdue. The second is Governor Geringer from Wyoming, who was Republican. One represents the East, one represents the West. Then we have Governor Bob Wise, who is the head of a national organization. We have local legislators who are Republican and Democrat that serve on the commission. We have people that have knowledge in higher ed using technology. We have people that are a part of the revisioning of entrepreneurism for Research Triangle Park. We have others that are involved in the policy and the direction of the rapidly changing technology. Plus, we have a team of advisors that are the best and the brightest from all over the country. And again, you'll see Jane's name there. And then we also have K-12 advisors. So our work is going to be birth through post-secondary, but our primary focus initially is going to be on K-12. And if you look at this, and I'll show you this quickly, these are the elements of the digital learning age. And this is where we're all headed. It doesn't matter if you're in K-12, it doesn't matter if you're higher ed, this is the direction we're going. Mastery, competency, learning anytime, personalized learning, student-centered instruction, digital content, asset assessments integrated into learning activities, parent portals, and project-based. You can do none of that without an infrastructure, without the connectivity that needs to take place. Therefore, you need to have the same kind of team we had at the state level, at the local level, in your communities, because that's how you begin your education. That's how you begin to involve people, and that is the work that DigiLearn will be doing. We'll be starting at the grassroots level, bringing teams together. It won't be just school teams. It will be school teams that have business leaders, policymakers, and others. When you look at this rubric, which is a digital learning rubric, which is the direction, again, we're going as a country, as a world, and we're already there. You'll see the one area circled is the technology and infrastructure and devices. And you'll see a list of some of the things that are impacted there: school networks, end-user devices, learning environments, technical support, supporting school services outside of school. Many of those things are currently not supported by policy, not supported by policy structures in many states. That means a lot of policy has to be changed, and a lot of funding streams that support that kind of policy have to be in place. But you can see that's a critical piece to this whole cycle for learning. Some facts to help reiterate why this is important is that 60% of today's jobs require some form of education after high school. However, our employability indicators show that few 25 to 34-year-olds have an associate's degree or higher. And we know that more education is required in a high-skilled, economically developing economy. Statistics from the U.S. Department of Labor show that 10 million Americans are unemployed. At the same time, there are 4 million jobs available. But the 10 million Americans that are unemployed do not have the skills to do the 4 million jobs that are available. And that's because of our growing skills gap. And one thing that became very clear to us as we were doing the research for not only the work we did in North Carolina, but also for DigiLearn, is that few people understand that the gross domestic product directly relies on the quality of your workforce. And when we've had unemployment all over the country, and you've had some states that have turned back money for support for the unemployed, and you have some efforts being made to have anybody take any job that's available. Well, when you do that, you lower the quality of what they can do, you lower the opportunity, improve your overall economic development. So that is counterproductive to what you're trying to accomplish. So if you want to have high-skilled jobs, particularly in the rural areas, the only way to get skill development there is to have some capacity through technology to have people retool themselves while they're in the rural areas, and they're going to continue to live there. We want them to live there, but we want them to have the same opportunity even if they live as they would in any part of the country. That's just the way it's going. If you look at the National Assessment of Educational Progress, which is how we measure how we've accomplished, you'll see this shows how the gap across the subgroups in education have continued to not show progress at the high level. But when you look at it overall, we appear to be growing, we appear to have higher graduation rates. But when you look at the subgroups, you'll see that our proficiency levels at our subgroups are not where they should be. And another key piece that is the first time this has been reported this past year is that out of all of our seniors that graduated this year, only 39% had the math and skills and 38% had the reading skills they needed for entry level into college. So it shows that we're not closing that gap. And the only way to close that gap is to create opportunities for more personalized learning. And the only way we can do that is by putting the technology into the hands of the learner so they have access to all kinds of learning opportunities. It also gives teachers opportunities to assess very quickly, find out what they know and what they don't know. If you look at the poverty, which again is a huge issue that we have to focus on, you'll see that 1 in 5 children was considered poor in 2012. And the largest group of poor children were Hispanic, white children, and black children. And what that tells us is that our population, our young children's population is growing in areas of poverty, and we're not seeing the improvement in that level. And the only way we'll then see that improvement is by increasing the education opportunities for those children. And the South, as you would imagine, is still considered the most challenged with poverty. And another interesting fact is by 2019, children of color will be in the majority. So as a country, we have to address that need. And the opportunity, what we have seen as the solution for this problem is that we have $591 billion spent annually for education, and of that, $7.97 billion is spent for educational technology. And while a good bit of the $591 billion is spent in personnel, it's also being spent for other things that are traditional in education and are not being used efficiently. So the funding is there. We just have to look at it as being used in a different way and increase that to get our return on our investment. On DigiLearn, we're looking to accelerate, engage, and communicate. And as Frank has given me the high sign that my time is growing to an end, what DigiLearn proposes to do is the same kind of work we did in North Carolina, only we're going to focus in the South and we're going to scale it to the rest of the country. And to bring you to closure after we say thank you, I'm going to bring you back to where North Carolina is today to prove my point. There has been a bill just dropped in the General Assembly, which is, again, controlled by the Republicans, to build on the work that we've already done in North Carolina. And as you can see, that's another $62 million that they're looking to invest in technology. And they are building on the assets we already have in place, which is the work we've done. So we've been able to sustain it. We've been able to engage the broader community. But it took a lot of work, and it took a lot of effort on the part of those who care about this to encourage people to work together to make this happen. Thank you.
We're keeping things a bit short. What I've learned from Myra is bipartisan support for this persists because they educated all stakeholders and they all had a vested interest in the process. I think the same opportunity exists at the local level, and that's part of their plan. Everything they're doing is based on very careful convening bringing stakeholders together, and quality research. So our next up presenter from SHLB is Director John Windhausen.
Thank you, Frank. It's a great pleasure to be here with you. But before I get into my comments, I just have to comment. Myra, so impressive. Really, fabulous. Really. North Carolina is you've got your act together in so many different ways, and really, it strikes me that it's so important to take that kind of holistic approach that North Carolina has. It's not just one. I have to be honest, as I was sitting here thinking my remarks, I'm really just dealing with a piece of this puzzle, and you really have put together all the pieces with the help of Jane and so many others in North Carolina. I'm focused as the SHLB Coalition more on the infrastructure. We're trying to get schools, health, and libraries with open, affordable, high-capacity broadband infrastructure so that they can then take it from there and do the educational training and the learning that needs to be done. But you need to have the raw materials. You need to have that foundation of broadband connectivity before anything else can happen. And so that's my focus, but I'm really just laying the groundwork for the work that you've done, and hopefully other states can do as well and take it to the next level. So what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about the E-rate changes that the FCC just recently made last year, which I think are a huge victory for schools and libraries, and then also talk a little bit more about the broader SHLB mission to promote broadband for all anchor institutions. So we are the Schools, Health, and Libraries Broadband Coalition. That's how we spell our name, with the SHLB. For those of you who are trying to figure out how SHLB is spelled, and our website is shlb.org. We've been in existence for the last 5 years. We were created when the stimulus bill passed Congress and contained the funding for what became the VTOP program and the BIP program. But we were initially formed simply to advocate for anchor institutions and be their voice in Washington. So we worked on the VTOP program and BIP, as I mentioned, and then we worked with the FCC on the E-rate reforms in 2010, the National Broadband Plan, worked with Blair Levin at the FCC, Universal Service Fund, the Connect America Fund, started holding our own conferences, and then we decided, you know, we're not a short-term project. We're actually a long-term institution. So that's when we incorporated a couple of years ago and obtained our 501c3 status. So we are a nonprofit organization. We have members all around the country. We're growing. We're up to 48 members now. If anybody else is interested in joining, please let us know, because we're in growth mode. We have funding and financial support from our membership dues and from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and some also from the Knight Foundation. But beyond that, we have big hopes of expanding our reach, because the needs of anchor institutions are continuing to be very, very strong. They need much more bandwidth than they've been able to get so far. And I know we have some great results from the VTOP program, connecting about 25,000 anchor institutions. That's about 10 to 15% of all the anchor institutions in the country. So it's enormous progress, but we still have an awful lot more to do. And the needs for broadband keep growing. So it's not enough just to be connected to a broadband connection. And now the scale and scope of that broadband is continually under pressure. And actually your slides show that too, as the demand keeps growing up and up and up at anchor institutions. The model is working in some ways, but we're a victim of our own success. The more you provide broadband to a library, the more people stream to that library to use it, and then it becomes the bandwidth demand outstrips the capability again. So we have stories after stories of libraries and schools that they'll double their capacity and they think they're good for another 5 years, and they've exhausted their capacity in 6 months. And they need to come back with a new solution. We have a story, I remember, from one library who said, okay, they were going to upgrade from DSL, so they were going to get a T1 connection. And you know, that's the kind of thing that often happens in the marketplace, and it's not till they realize that that's not really what they need. So we are big advocates for fiber. We think that for anchor institutions, fiber provides enormous benefits, because you can upgrade the capabilities of fiber just by changing out the electronics. If you build and deploy the fiber, yes, there's some one-time expenses for that is not insignificant, but once you make that investment, it will last for decades. And it's an investment that will pay dividends in the long run. And actually, I heard one of the earlier speakers here today talk about how much more expensive it is to run a copper network than to run a fiber network. You know, it costs more I think someone said it costs more to run the copper network serving 400 customers than it costs to run the fiber network for 4,000 customers. So that is the kind of philosophy that we have, and maybe those numbers aren't exactly right, but the point is that if you make an investment in high-capacity broadband for anchor institutions, it really is it's a sizable one-time investment, but it's going to pay for itself in the long run. In many ways, you're going to have lower operating costs, you're going to have greater technology benefits for the students at the schools who are able to implement and use these technologies, use the devices that they're bringing to schools. So that is our mission. We are advocates for very high capacity and affordable broadband. And so that's where we came to the E-rate program. The FCC launched a new round of E-rate changes about a little over a year ago. And we came in early and often with the FCC, filing comments throughout that proceeding, having meetings with the FCC staff and with the commissioners, saying, look, we need more bandwidth and we need more funding. And schools and libraries need more options as well. And what we had seen in the past, too often the schools or libraries were kind of locked in to a certain provider, leasing circuits that were sometimes at inflated prices because they knew the E-rate was covering some of the subsidies. So there was no competition to drive prices down and drive them to make them more affordable. There were also cases where schools and libraries would issue an RFP for service and nobody would respond. They'd get no bids whatsoever, or maybe they'd get one bid, but there was no competitive driving force. So our advocacy to the FCC was, look, you need to open up the options for schools and libraries to consider wireless solutions, if that's appropriate. You need to allow them to consider solutions from non-traditional players, whether it's competitive phone companies or cable companies or municipalities. You need to have that, schools and libraries have to have the options, and they're the ones that should be making these decisions because they know what's best for their local jurisdiction, their local geography, but at least give them the opportunity to explore some different possibilities. So the SHLB Coalition put a lot of time into filing a cost study. And we worked with Joanne Hovis and her engineering firm to do this. And we laid out the fact that it's going to cost, well, actually I should back up a second. Chairman Wheeler talked about the rural fiber gap. And that was that really hit home with us. We were very strong supporters of that kind of language. And he got it. He recognized that E-rate is going to need to have more resources if the rural schools and libraries are not going to be falling behind. So we did a fiber cost study to estimate how much it was going to cost to get fiber to all of the outlying schools and libraries that didn't have it already. And our numbers were in the $10 to $12 billion range. The FCC asked us not to put that number out for publication, so they thought that sounded like a too big number that might have some counter pressure back on us, so we wrote the study in a way that just made the argument for more funding without putting a specific label on it or a specific dollar figure, and that worked because the FCC relied upon our study and the study from Education Superhighway. Those were the two fiber cost studies that they looked at that allowed them to justify increasing the pot of funding for E-rate. So the net result was, in December, the FCC allocated an additional $1.5 billion per year for the E-rate program. So it went from $2.4 billion to $3.9 billion, and it includes an inflation kicker. So that $3.9 billion will continue to increase with inflation each year. And it also clarified the rules around dark fiber and allowed schools and libraries to have the option of building their own fiber network if they wanted to do so, or contract out to have some other third party build it for them, which is probably the more likely option. Even if a school or library chooses not to do that, it's very helpful for them in their negotiations with one of the existing providers to say, look, if you're not reasonable with your prices, I have an option to go somewhere else or to do it myself. And the FCC made that option available. And the FCC also gave them wireless options. And it included the opportunity to have managed Wi-Fi services. So instead of the school or library having to buy their own electronics and routers in the school or library, they could hire somebody else to manage it for them. That was not previously allowed under the E-rate program. So a number of these changes were really are going to be quite significant in our view to address this rural fiber gap, to address the broadband needs for schools and libraries, We haven't seen the fruits of that yet, largely because many of these rules don't take effect until 2016. They decided not to go forward immediately with these dark fiber rules, and it takes a while for schools and libraries to redesign their RFP process to incorporate the new rules into their systems. But we want this to work well. The FCC wants it to work well. The FCC has scheduled a workshop on May 20th, just about a month from now. And they've asked us for some recommendations for speakers, but the purpose of that workshop is to examine E-rate and its new fiber rules to help to clarify how these rules are going to work. What it really wants, what it's told me it wants to do is to help educate schools and libraries about how these rules could work. To be honest, I think it also wants to educate USAC.
That's
Right? So the USAC, they're the ones who actually receive the applications, will have to approve them, process them. They don't understand this yet, the administrative staff at USAC. So this is an effort to try to get some advance information out to them about how this is going to, hopefully this will be streamlined in a better way. And just by example, one of the programs that has not worked so well is the Rural Healthcare Fund, the FCC's Healthcare Connect Fund. I don't know if any of you have followed this. This isn't directly on point with the topic of this panel on education, but just a footnote. The FCC reformed the Healthcare Connect Fund and created this new Healthcare Connect Fund, supposedly with the goal of trying to incentivize greater broadband deployment to rural health clinics. Well, it really hasn't worked very well, partly because the rules are too difficult to follow, partly because USAC hasn't been implementing it in a consistent manner. So we don't want to create the same problems with E-rate that have been existing with the Rural Healthcare Plan. So that's at the federal level, some of the things we've been doing. But what's also interesting is to see what states are doing. And it's not just at the federal level, but an awful lot of states are taking up this challenge as well, trying to develop their own state programs. Minnesota has allocated some money. New York has allocated $500 million just for educational institutions. And they had a ballot proceeding last year that passed, and that gave the New York government the authority to issue bonds in order to raise $500 million specifically for schools to get better bandwidth in those schools. So that is another alternative way of going about this to try to address this need. Some states are not, however, and that's one of the future goals for the SHLB Coalition, is that we want to extend our reach beyond Washington, D.C., and extend our reach to other states that may not have had the chance yet to look at this technology and begin to think about what programs might work best for them. We had a conference in Kansas earlier this year that went very well, very successful, and I have to second Myra's comment about collaboration. That is so important to get people working together, and that was like the theme of our Kansas conference as well. We wanted to bring together people, the private sector industry, the traditional players, the newcomers, the wireless companies, the schools, libraries, health providers, all beginning to have a collaboration and a conversation. And actually, Mitzi, if you don't mind me pointing you out, I thought it was so interesting, and you said in the comment earlier, it was coming back from the SHLB conference that you met this wireless provider, and we're able to work out a deal with that in Maryland that is actually beneficial. That is just great, because that's what the SHLB Coalition tries to foster, is these communication and collaboration. And my final note on this is that I did see a very interesting study that was just published about 3 days ago in California, which I'll find here in a second, because it's the name is the Bay Area Council Economic Institute released a new report on how to upgrade the 21st century infrastructure. There are a lot of really great things about this report focused on communications policy and how to encourage greater infrastructure investment. But one of the things that they don't mention and focus on is partnerships. They really don't talk a lot about collaboration. They don't talk about network sharing. They have some good recommendations on rights of way and good recommendations about investment incentives, but this has to be done in a collaborative manner if you're going to succeed. You can't pit parties against each other, and the SHLB Coalition endorses the philosophy of partnerships, collaboration, conversations, and working together in order to make this happen, because that's the key to moving our country forward and increasing our educational opportunities. So thank you for the opportunity to talk to you.
John has been a leader at the policy level in the federal government. Myra has been a leader at the policy and education level, educating legislators and stakeholders at the state level. Strickling said, we'll make it or break it at the local level. Recent article by Blair Levin celebrating the 5 years of the National Broadband Plan is maybe adoption was the part that didn't work as well as hoped. My friend Gene Crick and I have been part of the Association for Community Networking, championing the cause of what's the best good people could do locally once online for themselves and others, and to share with other communities. And it's been quite a ride, and I'm going to ask him to give us some comments. I don't have time to give my presentation, but it's in the handout that was at the door. I put it on video. I hit a key and did my PowerPoint and talked, hit another key and put it on YouTube. You can now click and share this, and please do share it with your constituents. Many other links are on that page. This is an NTIA SBI Connect Alaska Technical Assistance sub-grant that was cut in half at the last minute and prohibited me from even going to Alaska. So I appear on a robotic iPad and chase the girls around the elementary lunchroom from my ranch house in rural Montana. And I am working with the powers that be at the grassroots, and we're pretty serious, Canoe Club. Fellow saw how to create a free e-commerce website 2 years ago, and we Skyped for 2 hours 2 weeks ago. And he said, it took me that long to get the vision of what I really want to do. And he wants to be a mentor to at-risk kids through Canoe Club. He's counseling emotionally disturbed children. He has a big vision. He's Pawnee and Tsimshian. And he's on Facebook. What's hot is not broadband. They have 40 meg at the school, but it's a politics of control type issue. And I won't get into the details. What's hot is social media. Everybody has a mobile device and is on Facebook. And I have Facebook feeds coming into me all the time from grandmothers and Canoe Club and also. On Facebook, I got a note here just last week that he has a little video that his kids made. It's 2 minutes only, and then I'm going to turn it over to Gene. But if we don't create awareness and motivation and excitement from the bottom up, it's not going to happen. And I've seen it not happen for 20, 30 years, being a direct grassroots innovator. I'm from Montana, the home of the Wilmots. I joke, but I was a Wilmot. I left Silicon Valley in 1974 because I didn't want to be a computer programmer. I could make the same money as a oil field roughneck in the wilds of Wyoming. So anyway, this is Canoe Club, and the vision here is this culture is reinventing itself using digital tools to preserve culture, to teach kids how they can remain a part of the community, living and working with family in the village of Metlakatla, which is a gorgeous place. So I think this video basically speaks for itself, and if you want to learn more, you've got the handout, and it has my contact information, and I'm tireless via Skype, via text, and any other medium you want to pick, because I have a passion for this, as does Johan Atkinson, the director of Canoe Club in Metlakatla.
Are you ready? We have something to tell you. We need you to listen. And we need you to do something for us. Teach me unity. Teach us our culture. Teach us respect. We need you to guide us. Let me tell you why it's important. I am the next generation. I am your future. I will graduate high school. We will go to college. I will be the role model that I need. I will become a role model. I will become a role model. I will become a Do it!
We'll be video conferencing Monday night with Canoe Club, launching a massively open online course within the next month for 5 billion young people coming online in the next 5 to 10 years via new microsatellite innovations by Google, Facebook, Richard Branson, and so forth. There's a global community that needs to understand the native values. We're all in the same canoe. We need to learn to pull together. Thank you.
Education and its impact at the community level. Presentation for Broadband Communities, Austin, Texas, April 15th, 2015. My name's Frank Odasz, President of Lone Eagle Consulting. Founded in 1997, my vision has been what's the best good people can learn to do for themselves and others online. Started with bulletin boards at 2400 baud and has been changing ever since, becoming greater and greater as far as the potential. Yet at the same time, the potential seems to be more and more elusive as the world accelerates in the level of change. I taught online courses for 10 years at the University of Montana before they saw the value of e-learning. I created online curriculums for rural e-commerce and telework strategies and offered them for 15 years during a time where most rural economic developers did not do anything digital. Teaching the innovation process to rural, remote, and indigenous learners has been my challenge. For the past 17 years, I've been working online based in a rural ranch setting. 2 billion people are online able to learn from the innovations of each other. 5 billion more will be online by 2020 due to new solar-powered drone microsatellite systems that Google, Facebook, and Richard Branson and others are now getting ready to launch. In times of change, learners inherit the earth, and rural innovation diffusion challenges are quite serious. They're greater now than ever. We have a considerable amount of resistance. The hope is to retain status quo for our cherished rural lifestyle, but it would appear that we need to revisit our history of creative adaptation to preserve our cherished rural lifestyle or suffer the consequences. Small town mindedness, self-defeating attitudes are common. Not invented here. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. I never turned one on. I never will. The nail that sticks up gets hammered down, and just who do you think you are? Well, teaching the innovation process is to be open-minded and to share what you're learning with others. What would you do if suddenly you had unlimited potential to learn anything you wanted and to teach anyone, to have a global voice, change the world? How many people would really be motivated to jump on that? It's threatening. The new gold rush, however, is literally mining raw human potential and how to encourage everyone to realize their full human potential. The evolution of the learning society is that everyone can now be both learner and teacher, consumer and producer, all the time, learning to build our own knowledge. Social media as personal learning networks brings us together as citizen learners. What's your daily information diet? Are you growing your ability to learn and create? If not, you're falling behind. The heart of the problem is the heart of the opportunity, And certainly in Alaska Native villages and Native American villages and isolated rural communities, one can learn a lot about the problem and can be nose to nose with the level of opportunities that need to be addressed. Gigacities are notorious for having a big vision. Information overload in seconds begs the issue of just how many megabits per second value can be delivered to overwhelmed citizens. No telcos are really in the training business, and there's a tension between whether faster is really what we need or perhaps smarter would make better sense. We can learn a lot from the bottom-up boom in innovations, which is outstripping the best R&D of the largest universities, governments, and corporations, though unrecognized as such due to the politics of control and the politics of appearances, which predominate, soon to be replaced by the politics of transparency. What gets measured gets done. Just how smart can broadband make me and how fast? It depends on the human bandwidth, a variable we have not yet paid attention to, but will. The goal of matching specific needs with specific resources in a timely manner has a lot to do with being fast, but there are different kinds of fast. Gigabit delivery of huge volume files, there's a need for that. Maybe 1% of citizens' information needs require a volume file. Timely response to specific needs is another type of fast. Fast training to motivate and produce results is another type of fast. Keeping us all up to the same instant of progress on a daily basis is a daily issue for timely delivery. Key opportunities for innovation. The top-down has yet to learn how to partner meaningfully with the bottom-up. We're decades into the information age. We're still acting like 20th century silo-based agencies. Rural adoption is relevant. What's working for others like us? We haven't really heard in rural America much about grassroots success stories. It's all been top-down. Hence, adoption is a problem. E-learning is the most scalable means of lowering costs, yet most people haven't been introduced to appropriate e-learning innovations, though they do exist. Effective collaboration would allow us all to share what we know, and hence we'd all have access to all our knowledge, but our 20th century siloism still prohibits us from enjoying the exponential potential of effective collaboration. The number one platform for innovation is mobile. The mobile platform for innovation is replacing PCs globally. More online shopping happens from mobile devices already. PCs are no longer the predominant vehicle for getting online, for shopping, for learning, etc. At the same time, mobile commerce and mobile learning have the opportunity to generate huge numbers of digital entrepreneurship innovations, as have already been demonstrated. Beyond the brick and mortar economy, in the year 2000, we heard about the new economy, and then the new economy. And the pace of change kept accelerating to where now we talk about the caring economy of healthcare for seniors in particular. The sharing economy, where Airbnb and Uber have created thousands of entrepreneurial opportunities simply by showing an easier method for marketing one's services online. Social media and the reputation economy. The innovation economy is creating disruptive change. The global integrated economy has huge potential, 5 billion coming online, tens of trillions of dollars in new markets. America's community anchor institutions have the opportunity to update the best practices on an ongoing basis, to define them across the 5 sectors of broadband, health, public safety, education, economic development, and energy, and across the diverse ethnic and age demographics and literacy levels. Maintaining and sharing a national database of specific best practices would make a lot of sense. New apps are appearing daily. We need new metrics to mirror local progress at both the individual level and at the local level, particularly, as Julius Janikowski said as former chairman of the FCC. We need to create a culture of use and creativity, rekindle the rural tradition of creative adaptation. Communities need public visual mirror metrics showing the community capacity building progress, or the lack of it, at both individual and community levels. Multi-community ongoing competitions can keep the energy fresh, sharing what's working in multiple communities as best practices to allow all innovations to bubble to the top competitively. NTIA, SBI, Connect Alaska has funded an Alaska Native Rural Innovations Incubator, continuing on from the Digitizing Alaska pilot in 2013. There's a lot to be said as to what's the best a Alaska Native village could do for itself, given broadband, given the first digital generation, given a global voice and a vision. In Winnett, Montana, several years ago, elders within an hour created their first e-commerce websites, and you can hear the excitement.
Winnett, Montana, 17 web pages and a community website, all in 45 minutes. A population of 198. We have about 35 people here from Winnett and around the county.
Short, create, and share events to stimulate initial motivation, like web raisings, are recommended. Here's the means of going to work in Metlakatla, an island village in Alaska, very unique, extremely scenic, wonderful people with a unique history. We conducted web raisings for marketing native crafts, where the youth and smartphones could be paired with non-digital elders, and models were posted online to inspire all other 250 Alaska Native villages, as well as rural and indigenous communities worldwide. America's challenge is motivating mass inclusion for innovation, 5 billion more young people coming online as America's opportunity to steer them in the right direction to participate in the integrated global economy, as opposed to feeling they need to learn to cheat and exploit in order to be successful. The top-down has to learn how to partner meaningfully with the bottom-up. 86 individuals hold half the wealth on the planet, as an example. I'm Secretary for the Rural Telecommunications Congress, the voice of rural prosperity. Currently, our rural communities resist collaboration, are trying to cling to our past values and resist some of the negativity we see online on the internet. Yet we need to raise the GPA of our rural communities, and that's the number of good people acting instead of being idle. We invite your participation as we try to champion the cause of sustainable. Gene? We got a ticket for you, Gene.
Okay. The only thing that I enjoy more than following adorable children is being the last obstacle to dinner. So trust me, to paraphrase a friend of mine, a politician, I'll be brief, no matter how long it takes. Anyway, I do have, while he's coming this up, I have worked with the commission. The beauty, long creds, honest, no kidding, beat up guarantee, work with Top Gap, all that sort of stuff. The guys are, you and I have crossed paths many times at the commission, work with USAC, love them. Okay. The beauty of, I'll tell you the tip, to get a long resume and policy work, and then start early and work for free. You get all the employment you want. So anyway,
That's the wrong slide.
Wrong slides.
You clicked the wrong button.
Actually, it's just fine. It looks just like my first slide, so I'm saying it's, but you really put together a beautiful panel here, because what I'd like to do is get us talking about how to do what, okay, and that's pretty much predictable, since I stole up our slide. And yes, I was founder of Rural Telecom
Hey, but we're on
back
that
in,
collaboration.
back in, God, I don't know what year, but it was at the Aspen Institute. Anyway, and I'm going to go out on a limb and say education is a good thing. To be true to the theme of the session, I will go out on a limb and say education is a good thing with technology. I'm also going to say broadband opens the world for learning, but the devil's in the details. All right, we know that. And that's how do we make it happen? Okay. One last example, kind of following on what Myra's done, is, and this is not particularly part of it, so I'm just saying that if we want to do something, because I'd like to get engaged here very quickly and effectively with each other. If we want to do something, some project, in my case, a good education project would be try to work up a portal so that to whatever degree it's possible, anyone can use the internet. Anyone can use the internet to grow and learn and get educated. You know? And that's not a tricky concept. I'm not going there now, except to say that that's a good typical or a beautiful dream and project that could be an online thing. Now, so how do we do it? And that's what we're sort of about today, because you've heard, it's really been great, because you've heard the spectrum, you've heard of something that can be done beautifully and well, all right? And that's at one end of it. Both speakers have noted that getting buy-in, there are a few things you've got to do. I know, because I don't like to brag, but I've got a larger collection of mistakes than anybody in this business, I think. One of the things we've learned, you may have heard me earlier, I had the community net part of the Telecommunications Infrastructure Fund, and we spent $1.7 billion on it, and as I bragged earlier, and I shouldn't, we probably didn't waste more than $1.2 billion. You know what I mean? We learned. And so I'm saying that what we need to do here, and this is my last slide, is to, first of all, hang on, capture the energy here. Because, I always get a little energy. I just want to see things being done well, and I find tools to do it. Actually, it happens to resonate because the modernization work has been the last 18 months. The key word, you heard it already, the magic word for all the money, collaboration. The modernization order, the current philosophy of the chairman of the administration emphasizes collaboration, which is how it ought to be. You emphasize collaboration, and that's how it can be done. Anyway, so we want to hang on to the buzz today, carry it forward in some manner. Let's face it, this is really more energy than you can get without handling snakes. And so anyway, so I'm saying now we've got to be honest about the realities and focus on our strengths. If we go in, or another one, you can see the scars. If we go in and try, and I'm saying the we here is, I'll say local level, citizen level. It can be a state, it can be a county, it can be, but if we go in and try to compete exactly head to head for the other end of the pipe, which is to say the policies and the enabling statutes that make it possible, it's uphill. That's not our strength. We are several, But what we do have is communication and commitment. Because it's kind of like that old thing of being committed. We have to. Particularly, let's say rural. I headed at the FCC, I headed the Rural and Underserved Working Group. You got to. The digital divide is no joke. This is not news to anybody in the room. I don't need to belabor it, but we've got to get out of it, and we've got to get out of it. And we do not have the most power in the world in constituency. Unfortunately, using rules as an example, population, if not declining, is very frequently changing. All right, transition. Older, lower household income, and so forth. This is not how you build power and impact in a political society. Yes, I know it's good. Again, we don't have to beat that to death. The best way to do it is back to collaboration, cooperation, all of those good things. And I'd like to suggest, and we'll start right now, I'd like to suggest that one of the first things we can do to be able to walk away from the room and the conference with a little more than happy memories is to latch on to a means and a commitment to follow up, to share, to communicate. I don't know what it is, we'll leave it to everyone, but find a way to follow this together. Most of us working with lots of small communities have discovered it's a fact of life. communities don't always work and play well with each other, or within, all right? So if we can find some manner, like DigiLearn, if we can find some manner they can contribute upstream, where they can support upstream, then that's a win. An organization, a movement, I don't, I'm not going to tell you how to best do it. Another thing is find and develop alliances, all right, appropriate for the issues. That doesn't always mean the same alliance. You do not have to, we don't have to match tattoos and sing "We Are the World." If there's some group that wants what we want, like for instance, I work with rural and I work with underserved, and that's not always the same thing. An urban underserved has some challenges that may be different from the rural, but the goals are the same and some of the challenges are the same, and we can certainly find common ground. And so I suggest that. Work with other groups, work with other movements. I am incidentally going to advocate working with organizations like CLIC, the one that works with municipals and stuff. I've been working with municipals. The other and final point on this is, it's to be effective with this, and I'm trying to do kind of a best practices like that. To be effective, we really have to stay very much on point, stay lean. Otherwise, it's a